Hi, Crime Junkies. We are back with the details of a case that I ever so briefly touched on last episode. The victim in today's case always gets lumped in with a group of missing and murdered people from this small Pacific Northwest area. And authorities and community locals believe that they were all killed by the same man. But this case has always been the outlier because of how this young woman was found. Dismembered in garbage bags floating in the Snake River. The thing is, I think she very well could be a victim of a serial killer, just not the one that we talked about last week. I have been tracking a new man who somehow kept turning up in the same areas as dismembered women in the 80s. And I want to bring you guys in on the investigation because I need your help. But let me start with the University of Idaho student whose story came well before the Idaho 4th that we talked about 2 weeks ago. This is the story of Kristin David. In late June and into the first couple of days of July 1981, police in the Lewis-Clark Valley, right where Washington and Idaho meet, are getting a flood of calls in response to local news of a missing co-ed from the University of Idaho. 22-year-old Kristin David was on summer break, and while she was going to be staying with her sister in Lewiston, Idaho, she wanted her bike and a couple of other things that she'd left behind at her campus apartment. So on June 25th, she had a friend drive her the 30 miles or so back to Moscow, Idaho, so she could get her things, and then she was going to actually bike back the next morning on the 26th. I mean, the ride was mostly downhill. It would take her maybe 3 hours, easily doable for Kristin. Except she never made it back to Lewiston. Both her and her bike just vanished somewhere along the long stretch of Highway 95. Now, it took a few days for police to consider foul play in Kristin's case. But as news of her disappearance made its way to locals, plenty of people were calling in sightings of her from the 26th. Some were innocuous, just saying that she was biking alone, but those kind of helped pinpoint how far she might have made it before she disappeared. But other sightings were more ominous. And over again, police were hearing about a man and a mysterious brown van that may have been with Kristin on the side of the highway. Now, these sightings differ a little bit based on who comes forward. For instance, one man says that he saw the brown van parked on the side of the road, and a woman who looked like Kristin was loading her bike into the back of it with help from this man. They said she didn't look distressed, so he didn't stop or do anything or whatever. Then another witness named James claims to have seen a similar-looking van pulled over to the side of the highway close to this town called Genesee, which is just north of Lewiston. And in this sighting, the driver was standing outside on the driver's side, and a young blonde woman matching Kristin's description was standing towards the rear of the van, and the bicycle was laying in the weeds. Based on the scene, he assumed that the girl had some kind of accident and that this man was helping her. Although James says that he saw a shadow and 2 feet on the opposite side of the van, there was someone else on the other side that he just couldn't see. And he said he didn't stop because, again, he thought this guy was already stopping and helping and, nobody would need him. So being 1981, as police start getting a flood of these vague descriptions, they begin bringing people in to put them under hypnosis, hoping to get more details about this mystery van or ideally the license plate. All of the witnesses agree that the brown van was sporting an Oregon license plate. And a few under hypnosis can remember some of the letters and numbers. James says that the last 2 digits were 37. And that's backed up by another witness who says the plate had the numbers 737.
Were any of them able to describe the driver?
Yes, they were, and not any better under hypnosis, but in their initial statements, they all give this similar-ish description. One witness who was driving past says that this guy had this full kind of shaggy beard. Another describes this guy as quote-unquote grubby, whatever that means to that person. And James comes in with the most detailed description, describing this man as approximately 30 years old. He's a white guy, 5'10" to 6 feet tall. He said he had a husky build, maybe if he had to guess 175 to 180, with a trimmed beard, brown hair, and wearing a brown and white checkered shirt and army-type khaki pants. Although, as detailed as that was, I feel like it's worth noting that James's story changes some over time. Like, for instance, he gives 2 statements shortly after Kristin went missing. And the first, he mentioned seeing the feet under the van, like someone else was on the other side. But then in the second one, he doesn't mention any other person. And then the story he tells years later, when he participated in an episode of the series Cold Valley, it changes like more drastically, I think. At that point in 2018, he says that he was driving past and he spotted this brown van, but now Kristin wasn't standing up. She was laying down in the grass next to her bike as though she had been hit. And then he says he sees the driver, the one man, getting out of the van, walking back towards where Kristin was laying, and this dude was smiling.
And there's no mention of any of these details before.
No, and our team even tried reaching out to James, but we couldn't get through. So I kind of wonder if what he saw in 81 morphed into something more sinister in his mind, especially after July 4th, when people finally realized what happened to Kristin after she went missing. A little over a week after witnesses spotted Kristin on the side of the road with that bearded man and brown van, this guy who is spending his 4th of July fishing on the Snake River spots a black garbage bag in the water near the riverbank. And it's unusual enough that curiosity gets the best of him, and he looks inside. And that's when he sees parts of Kristin David. And then downstream, there is another one of these same black trash bags. So he calls police, who over the course of that evening and the next morning collect 5 bags in total containing parts of Kristin's new dismembered body. Though according to an article in the South Idaho Press, it would take 5 days for them to confirm her identity officially. Now, there was very little evidence to work with when they removed each part one by one from the bags. I mean, they couldn't tell exactly when she had been killed or how long she'd been in the water. But Detective Jackie Nichols with the Asotin County Sheriff's Office told us that investigators believed she had likely died either the day she went missing or very shortly after. Kristin's body showed signs of skin slippage, which is like a natural part of decomposition, but it is slowed down when a body is in the water. So according to my research, it can take as little as 24 hours for this to happen after a body is placed in water. Although there are like a ton of different factors that can impact this. So the working theory is that she was killed and then dumped relatively quickly. And then what probably happened is the bags sank to the bottom of the river before surfacing and then being discovered on the 4th. And all of that to say, investigators then were left with little hope of collecting any biological evidence. And none of her personal effects, like jewelry or anything else, was found on her body either. And it's interesting, I do see a note in the files that we have seen that says she had a wristwatch that she was known to wear, and that watch was located, but I'm not sure where it was found. Like, was it with her remains, or did they go back to her apartment or something and find it there? I don't know. But there was one clue left behind by whoever wrapped Kristin and put her in those bags. Each body part was wrapped in newspapers. And they realized that the newspapers were from 4 different issues of the Lewiston Morning Tribune. They were dated April 7th, April 17th, April 19th, and April 24th, which to me is interesting because it's not like someone just found one random paper. Like, it really is more of a series of papers, as though the killer used the ones that had been delivered to their home. And
whatever was around.
Right. And sure, there are thousands of other scenarios where these could have been picked up or found or whatever. But I mean, think about it. This person had to have somewhere to go to dismember Kristin in the first place. They're going to go somewhere that they know, somewhere that's private, that they are familiar with and feel comfortable in.
Well, and so familiar that they may get the daily paper there.
That's my thinking. Because nothing about this feels sloppy or rushed. This person took their time to do exactly what it is they wanted to do to her. I mean, her dismemberment is described as almost surgical. Like, whoever did this either has medical knowledge
or has done this before.
Exactly. And there were also signs of mutilation on her body and some sort of muscle or tissue in her mouth.
Do we know anything about her cause of death?
So transparently, yes. So we obtained some of Kristin's files through a FOIA request. And there is documentation of her cause of death and other injuries she sustained. But Detective Nichols has asked that we don't publicize that information. While she isn't the lead investigator on Kristin's case, she has done a lot of work on it, and she thinks that it would be best not to get into that in detail. And then we couldn't get in contact with the actual lead investigator at the FBI, and their office wasn't willing to answer any of our questions. So just out of respect for Detective Nichols' request, we're not going to get into that. But to answer your question, yes, we know and investigators do know. And here's something I can tell you that I don't think has been reported before, and something that I think could be a hallmark of her killer's MO. I told you they discovered 5 different bags in the Snake River. They found her head, her torso, both arms. Some of them were double bagged. And then her left leg and hips and buttocks were found all connected, but not in a bag. Now, the upper part of her right thigh was also recovered, but I can't tell from the reports if that was in a bag or not. But what I'm getting at is when all is said and done, when the whole shore had been searched and investigators were ready to pack everything up, the rest of her right leg, so we're talking everything from the knee down, was never found. Never recovered.
What?
Could searchers have just missed it? Possibly. I mean, there's one report I saw in the case file that briefly mentions seeing a similar looking black trash bag floating like way out in the middle of the river, and since the waters were choppy, no one could get to it before it disappeared. So maybe that's where her missing leg ended up. But also, I don't see any reports of that turning up later or being found by anyone else.